In today's video, we're talking about Vietnam's bold new plan to kick gasoline-powered motorcycles off the streets of Hanoi as soon as next summer, and why cars running on fossil fuel are likely next in line for the scrap heap. All the sources I used are linked in the description. If you've ever visited Vietnam, or watched a travel vlog shot in its buzzing capital, you'll know that motorcycles aren't just a way to get from point A to point B, they're practically a way of life. By the government's own count, there are nearly 7 million motorbikes registered in Hanoi and more than 72 million across the country, equal to roughly 500 bikes for every 1,000 people. Those ubiquitous two-wheelers thread every alley and crowd every sidewalk, delivering groceries, giving kids a lift to school, and powering a whole gig economy army of couriers. But they also pump out a staggering share of urban pollution. In January, a thick gray haze pushed Hanoi to the top of the most polluted city rankings, with PM 2.5 readings peaking at 26 times the World Health Organization's safe limit. Fed up with that toxic soup, officials announced a year-by-year playbook that starts with a hard ban on gasoline motorcycles inside Ring Road 1, the historic core of the capital, beginning July 1st, 2026. Riders who try to scoot through the zone on anything other than an electric bike or scooter can expect fines, towing, or even license suspension. Within 4 more years, the no-gas perimeter ratchets out to Ring Road 2, and by 2030, it reaches the entire urban area. On paper, the policy sounds almost overnight, but it has been in the works for years. Hanoi floated the idea back in 2017, and Ho Chi Minh City adopted a gentler restriction plan shortly after. Where things get really interesting is the follow-through. Vietnam's Ministry of Transport published a national e-mobility roadmap in 2024 that calls for phasing out fossil fuel cars, trucks, and buses nationwide by 2040 and hitting net zero emissions across the fleet by 2050. So the motorcycle ban isn't a one-off. It's the opening act in a far bigger transition. Think of it like the first domino in a long line that eventually tips over every internal combustion vehicle in the country. For a moment, zoom out and look at the sheer scale of that challenge. Motorcycles account for 94% of Vietnam's registered vehicles, and 32 million more are expected to be sold before 2035 if nothing changes. Hanoi's subway has only 2 lines operating. Buses still grab a tiny slice of commuter trips, and EV charging plugs are scarcer than sidewalk cafes. No small feat in Vietnam. Critics say the city is trying to leap before it can walk, pointing to the elderly who rely on old Hondas and delivery drivers who live paycheck to paycheck. Officials counter that the timeline buys just enough breathing room for industry to tool up and for infrastructure to catch up. And that's where VinFast rolls onto the scene. The homegrown automaker delivered over 11,000 electric cars in Vietnam last month alone, and pushed out more than 31,000 e-scooters and bikes in the final quarter of 2024. To sweeten the pot, Hanoi is dangling lower registration fees, free parking pilots, and subsidized battery swap stations for early adopters. Analysts already peg the domestic EV market at about $3 billion today, with a compound growth rate of nearly 19% heading toward 2030. Taken together, those numbers signal that Vietnam isn't flying blind. It's betting on its own manufacturing might to make electrification affordable at breakneck speed. If you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps a ton and lets me know you'd like more deep dives like this. Back to the policy nuts and bolts. Compliance will hinge on a tri-pronged approach: stick, carrot, and alternative. The stick is straightforward: fines and roadblocks. The carrot includes tax holidays for zero-emission imports, low-interest loans for buyers, and pilot programs that let ride-hail drivers swap batteries in under 2 minutes instead of waiting to charge. The alternative is better public transit. Hanoi's second metro line added 13 kilometers of track this spring, and city planners say new bus rapid transit corridors are coming online before the motorcycle ban kicks in. Still, the city acknowledges that transit upgrades alone won't replace tens of thousands of daily bike journeys. Hence, the massive push toward electric two-wheelers. Economically, the stakes go far beyond cleaner air. Fuel imports eat up roughly $6 billion of Vietnam's trade balance each year, and motorcycles guzzle a sizable chunk of that. Swapping fossil fuel for electrons, especially electrons that come from an increasingly renewable grid, could free up cash for roads, schools, or the burgeoning chip assembly sector. It also dovetails with Vietnam's pledge under COP26 to reach net zero emissions by mid-century and unlock billions in green transition loans from international partners. Of course, there are clouds on the horizon. Electricity demand is already growing at 8% annually, and the World Bank estimates that full transportation electrification could add another 60 terawatt-hours per year by 2040, roughly the output of 6 large coal plants. Grid upgrades and renewable build-outs have to move in lockstep, or the country risks trading tailpipe pollution for smokestack pollution. There's also a consumer confidence hurdle. Riders worry about range, resale value, and even whether an e-bike can handle a pothole-ridden alley after a monsoon. Early adopters rave about the instant torque and zero gear shifts, but large segments of the population remain skeptical. Yet, history suggests that once Vietnam commits to industrial transformation, the pivot happens fast. Recall that in the 1990s, barely anyone in Hanoi owned a mobile phone. By 2010, it became one of the most connected cities in Southeast Asia. Similar curves played out with broadband, cashless payments, and even solar rooftops, which exploded from virtually zero to the region's highest per capita capacity in under 5 years. The country's knack for leapfrogging older tech could prove decisive again. On the regional front, Vietnam isn't alone. Taiwan plans to ban petrol motorcycle sales by 2035. Thailand has floated a 2035 cutoff for new combustion cars, and Indonesia has a goal for 10 million e-bikes on the road by 2030. Vietnam's strategy lands squarely in the middle, more aggressive on two-wheelers, a bit slower on cars, but laser-focused on getting there through domestic production rather than imports. So where does this leave the average Hanoian motorbike owner? In the short term, they'll have choices. Keep the old bike for runs to grandma's village outside the ban zone, spring for an electric model with government rebates, or shift to public transit for downtown commutes. Look a decade out though, and those choices narrow. Gas stations inside the city core will dwindle. Parts for carbureted engines will cost a premium, and resale values could plunge. If the phase-out stays on schedule, owning a fossil fuel bike in central Hanoi by 2030 will feel a bit like keeping a VHS player in 2025. Doable, but increasingly inconvenient. Before we wrap, one final nugget. The same decree that kicks gasoline bikes to the curb also directs agencies to draft regulations for private cars. While no firm date is set, officials hint that a registration ban on new fossil fuel cars could arrive as early as 2032, stepping toward a complete phase-out by 2040. Automakers, foreign and domestic, are already lobbying for clarity so they can plan factory retooling. Translation: the motorbike story you're hearing today is a preview of the car story we'll all be talking about tomorrow. All that said, the road ahead is anything but guaranteed. Enforcement gaps, equity concerns, and infrastructure delays could stall progress. But if Vietnam pulls it off, the country might create a blueprint for other emerging economies that want cleaner air without sacrificing mobility or growth. All sources are linked in the description, including a video on why 4 Chinese automakers earn more per car than Tesla. Thanks for watching.